Our ANC-led administration and foreign policy that we are implementing started or is linked to the more than 100 years of the history of the organization, and is directly linked to the 19 years of the new democratic government led by the African National Congress. After 10 years of ANC in government, we had a 10-year review. At the end of the 15 years, we had a 15-year review. We are busy now with the 20-year review. And going back to directly answering your question, I would want us to go back to the historic fact that ours is a 19-year administration led by the African National Congress. So the foreign policy that we implement is informed by policy positions as following adoption of resolutions of conferences of the African National Congress. When we came out of Polokwane, amongst the many things that we derived for our mandate for 2009 elections was that we should continue to link our domestic priorities to foreign policy implementation. On the manifesto of the 2009 elections, there were 5 key priority areas that were identified. So our foreign policy implementation was to find a way that we internationalize, that is the international work we do, respond directly to our domestic challenges. Key amongst them, how do we use our economic diplomacy to implementation of eradication of the triple challenges that we are faced with, that of inequity, that of poverty and unemployment. The 5 key priority areas of government, I'm sure you're well aware of. I don't have to repeat that. Championing the African agenda, that as we were moving toward the 50th anniversary of the AU, we continue to look at how do we contribute to a peaceful, democratic, and a better South Africa, in a better region, Africa, in a better world, and an Africa that is at peace with itself and developmental. Now, what are the highlights of the achievement of that which we were informed by the outcomes of these conferences that have resolutions of the conference that I've referred to earlier? One of the key outcomes was make sure that we intensify South-South cooperation. We continue to champion implementation of outcomes of IPSA, which was formed in 2003. Luckily, I was ambassador then in India when IPSA was formed. This is an outcome of a forum of the countries of the South, the most democratic countries of the South, whose voice has become even louder, that we get engaged, we get consulted on building, particularly on democratic project, internationally, particularly from countries of the South, as Brazil, India, and South Africa, India, Brazil, South Africa. Also responding to the call of strengthening ties with the countries of the South, we have now not only encouraged the formation of BRICS, we are in BRICS, and we have hosted the first ever BRICS summit on African soil and a historic one in South Africa, with very clear outcomes of the eThekwini Declaration and Action Plan, where we had agreed for the establishment of the development bank, BRICS Development Bank, where we had launched the BRICS Business Council, where we also launched the BRICS Think Tank Council, where we had interbank or multilateral banking systems aligned and signed MOUs that are very important between Development Bank of South Africa and their counterparts in the respective countries of BRICS, to name but just a few of the successes that we attained in the BRICS Summit. We have successfully, working together with other countries of SADC, managed, as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the AU, to have unified further the voice of the AU, but also work together to elect the first African woman to sit at the helm of this historic organization of the continent, the African Union Commission, in the name of Dr. Nkoana Dlamini Zuma. We remain an active member of the G20. We are championing the reforms of global international financial institutions, from World Bank to IMF. We continue to champion working together with other African countries and other developing countries, the reforms of the UN Security Council, actively participating in issues peace and security in our continent and also globally. We have served in less than, from 2007 and 2008 in the previous administration, we were in the Security Council. Recently, we have gone back to the Security Council, so that we keep going back so that our voice is heard, and we work with other progressive governments on this championing of the reforms of the UN, and in particular the UN Security Council. As we concluded our second tenure in the Security Council, we have been elected into ECOSOC, the premier interlocutor for the UN systems on economic development. That's where we are at the moment. We are, and we have been elected into the Peace Committee. I'm sure you remember that we also hosted a very successful and historic United Nations Framework for Climate Change, UNFCCC, COP17. I hear that even in the negotiations in Bonn now, as they prepare for Poland, they were still talking about the COP17. Some complaining that they don't think that we had a very good conclusion in Doha, but I was there to hand over. I just heard they said they were missing us. That's what our negotiators were telling us. We continue to work with the countries in our neighborhood, SADC, for peace, security, and democratic rule. We support countries going into elections. On peace and security on our continent, in the 5-year tenure, we served in the troika of, and we still are currently in, of the troika of the peace and security and politics of SADC. We've served a full term in the AU Peace and Security Council. We also, on issues peace and security, we, under the chairpersonship of President Zuma, when we were chairing the United Nations Security Council, adopted a historic resolution which was adopted unanimously, the Security Council, that of proper coordination of issues, peace and security on our continent between the AU Peace and Security Council and the United Nations Security Council. That was in January 2012. Recently, at the just concluded AU Summit, we were part of the Africa's interim responsive measures on areas that need intervention on peace and security, while waiting for the full implementation and mobilization of the African Intervention Brigade. So we will have an interim structure, basically being of countries, of volunteer countries, if there's when there's a need, at the exposure, which is made available to the AU, that if the AU Commission was to call on countries that would be able to rapidly deploy in an area that needs attention, of where democracy is being undermined, at interim, these countries should be able to do so. This came through a special decision of the AU, and we championed that, and it was adopted. And by the time it was adopted, more than 10 countries were saying, we not only support South Africa's initiative, we're also ready to deploy as and when called upon by the AU to do so, to defend peace, security, and democracy on our continent. We did not achieve this on our own. This is through a collective of a cabinet led by President Zuma and the African National Congress. I think the biggest success story would be our membership in BRICS. We have seen trade and investments, skyrocketing. I mean, trade between us and China has surpassed 200 billion in less than 2 years. Trade between us and Brazil and Russia. The last count on Russia is, while the base was very low, but it has gone to more than 69%. When the Russians were in South Africa recently on the sidelines of BRICS, and we had this working visit with them, first we had the official visit by the new president of China, just cementing all the good things that we've been doing with China, accelerated by our signing of strategic partnership with China. And China, being the second biggest economy in the world, had pledged, not only pledged, after signing the strategic partnership treaty, they came back and say, identify 10 key export products that you want to export to China. And we pledge that we will live up to our promise. And they're doing that. The Russians came, and among the many other important agreements signed was one with Denel, where the Russian government has decided that on all helicopters that they would have been Russian-made helicopters operating in all corners of the continent in Africa will be refurbished in South Africa. I mean, that spends thousands of jobs, but also very good for, training of our artisans, but also spare parts being sourced from South Africa. Despite the doom and gloom of the economic meltdown, we've seen these emerging economic powers cushioning us to a larger extent, and our exports, because they have really expanded their exports, particularly of value-added products from South Africa to all those member countries of BRICS, but also to other emerging markets, both in Africa, in our continent, which is our own neighborhood, but also in the other developing countries in the South. Let me hasten to say that as we're expanding in these new markets, we have not forgotten our traditional exports, trading partners, and also countries that are still very important for as sources of investment, the European Union. That's why we spent the whole week in this region to consolidate, to identify areas that need attention between us and our partners. As you know, we had a successful ministerial political dialogue with Lady Baroness Ashton, and we will be hosting, or President Zuma will be hosting President Van Rompuy and Barroso in July in South Africa. So, because of the independence and solid foreign policy that we are championing, we are not struggling. I mean, we are friends with the international community. We make our contribution. We also source markets. So there's absolutely no door where we knock and we are not received well. So I think that's a good sign that foreign policy implementation of the African National Congress under President Zuma has been very successful, particularly the economic diplomacy. I think the message to South Africans is we have to continue believing in ourselves. We have been dealing with challenges of more than 300 years in less than in 19 years. We think, looking back, we have done well, but we have to continue working together, dealing with challenges old and new. Amongst them being that because we are part of the global community, the world over, there's this surge of youth unemployment, of general unemployment, brought by this global economic recession. Even in countries that were considered developed, you have this upsurge of unemployment of largely of young people. This week that we had spent here in Europe, we had a confirmation from leaders here that first time in their history, more than 26.5 million of Europeans who are 40 years and above, I'm just not talking about the youth. The youth is another matter. People around between 35 to 45 years who had given up looking for jobs have now come to the tune of about 26.5 million. I think we need global solutions to this very, very, unprecedented global challenge that we're faced with. It says that the old economic models that we were asked to follow globally, both from developing countries and developed, are no longer working. They are no longer helping us to respond to the challenges of today. Now, going back home, as an emerging democracy, as at the time when we really thought we were picking up and moving forward, we shouldn't give up. We should continue doing the things that we needed to be doing, working together. The solutions we got for the political problems in South Africa, we managed to get those because we worked as one. These economic challenges that we are faced with today need partnership between government, business, labor, and civil society. In many countries which are faced with this kind of a challenge, they don't have the kind of natural resources that South Africa and many other African countries are endowed with. Many of the countries that are faced with this challenge do not have the potential that we have in our agricultural sector. Many of the countries, particularly where we are sitting now at the moment, have aging populations. We've got young population, particularly on the continent, including South Africa. So it will mean that we have to work extraordinarily smarter, not only harder, to make sure that we look at all the potentials that we have, but we put our best foot forward, and that our unity would remain our strength. If it wasn't for this challenge that we are faced with, I'm sure we would have gone a long way, faster than we are at the moment. But we still feel we have a chance. We just should not miss this opportunity now. We are still ranked amongst the best in the world in economic trends. We will share our notes with you on what we had observed, what we had highlighted, on the positives that go on the side of South Africa, which we all should be aware of and work on. So things are still looking on the brighter side, but it will only get better if we choose to work on the positive side. We are like all other governments, thinking, let's continue working on skills development. Let's continue working in partnership with government, business, and labor on identifying skills that are needed now that can help ramp up economic development, so that economic development that doesn't produce jobless growth, but that which absorb skillfully the young people who are out there needing to be absorbed into the job market in particular. When we were at the AU to celebrate the jubilee of the Continental Organization, the young people who were there representing the youth of our continent were saying, yes, they are here, they are privileged to be celebrating the jubilee of the AU. They don't only want to be considered the future. Because they are here and now and they are adults, they must also be considered as the present. They were saying, we are the present and the future. So whatever plans we have now and in the future, we think it should be in partnership with our present and the future, our youth. Our best resource for the future, it's our people. Inward investment would mean that we hear from our economists that there are billions and billions of rands in South Africa, in the hands of big business and whichever other size of business in South Africa, who, if they were to invest in new ventures internally, this would go a long way in contributing to the economic well-being of our economy. To me, a call for inward investment would mean that we believe, and that's what we were told by Europeans, by the way, that they think they would encourage, even with this current economic situation here, that there are opportunities in Africa, there are opportunities in South Africa for business to continue thriving, so that they would encourage their business people to invest in South Africa. Why? Because this is one of the most democratic, emerging, and vibrant economies, the biggest and most diverse economy in the continent of Africa. More importantly, with a constitution whose safeguards for both domestic and international investor, potential and current, that would feel very safe because of the way we have not only championed this the drafting and the adoption of this constitution 19 years ago, but that it's a most well celebrated constitution. But like I said, importantly, with all the important safeguards for both domestic, international, potential and current investors to feel safe and have good returns for their investments. So we think that inward investment would also mean we are championing value addition for our natural resources, be it in the mining sector or in the agro sector, but also in the areas of energy as we expand the economy. There's an upsurge of needs for upgrading our energy facilities in South Africa. So these are all opportunities that are there now. The call for the infrastructure build that's unfolding at the moment, worth 850 billion, championed by the president through the PICC. It's another huge opportunity for inward investment. And also the connectivity that we are encouraging on our continent, infrastructure connectivity, which will expand the economic integration in our continent, is another big opportunity. So it's not only good to be in one of the most diverse and biggest economy on the continent as Africa is rising, but it's good for business, but it's also wise to do so because there are good returns for investments. But we say so because it's also good for us, because it will also be good to expand the job opportunities that we are canvassing for our people. Sustainable jobs. The good thing about the Finnish investors is that when they come, they stay. And they don't come small. I mean, from Nokia to whichever other, they are very rich in architecture, in designs, in the technology broadly. We are also looking at inviting them or encouraging them to come into the sector in the maritime, particularly shipbuilding, which is run by private companies. I mean, you've seen, I don't know how many boats did you see here. It's like every small lake has some roving boats. And so the sector that we are opening up for in South Africa and we are encouraging is shipbuilding, ship maintenance, boats, manufacturing, and so on and so on. But like I said, we can give you the figures. I'm sure we will be able to do that at the end of this interview. It's not only just Finland, it's the Nordic countries. It's value for money for them, but also you see how excited people become here when they see sunshine. So we've got enough for them, but this is an area that they are very much accustomed to, and we like it because they also long stayers and good spend.